The bitter wind howled across the Montana frontier, stinging Lillian Foster's tear-streaked face as she clutched the small bundle in her arms tighter, desperately trying to shield the infant from the unrelenting December blizzard of 1876. Her husband's body lay cold beside her, blood staining the pristine snow crimson, the stagecoach robbers having shown no mercy when he'd attempted to protect his family. Now she sat alone, her legs growing numb, the baby whimpering softly, both their lives measured in the rapidly diminishing warmth they shared. "Please, God," she whispered through cracked lips, her voice barely audible over the whipping wind. "Don't let my son die out here." The distant sound of hoofbeats seemed like a hallucination, at first a cruel trick played by her freezing mind. But then a towering figure emerged through the curtain of white, a man atop a powerful black stallion. He dismounted swiftly, his spurs jingling as his boots crunched in the snow. His face was partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see keen blue eyes assessing the grim situation. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and steady as he knelt beside her. His gaze shifted from her face to her husband's body, then to the tiny bundle she held. "You're freezing to death out here." Lillian could barely speak, her teeth chattering violently. "My husband, they killed him. The baby." The stranger's weathered face softened as he looked at the infant. Without hesitation, he removed his heavy duster coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then he held out his gloved hands toward the baby. "Let me take him," the cowboy said gently. "I'll get you both somewhere safe." Lillian hesitated, maternal instinct warring with the knowledge that refusing help meant certain death for them both. With trembling arms, she allowed the stranger to carefully take her son. "Name's Lucas Blackwood," he said, tucking the baby securely inside his woolen shirt against his chest. "Got a cabin about 2 miles from here. Can you ride?" Lillian nodded weakly, though she wasn't certain she could. "I'm Lillian Foster, and that's James in your arms." Lucas helped her to her feet, supporting her weight when her numb legs nearly buckled. "Mrs. Foster, I need to get you and your boy out of this weather now. We'll come back for your husband when the storm passes." With surprising gentleness for such a large man, Lucas helped Lillian onto his horse before mounting behind her. He kept one arm firmly around her waist while the other secured the baby against his chest. As they rode through the worsening blizzard, Lillian felt consciousness slipping away, her body slumping against the cowboy's solid frame. "Stay with me, Mrs. Foster," Lucas urged, his breath warm against her ear. "Your boy needs you, stay awake." But the cold had seeped too deeply into her bones. The last thing Lillian remembered was the strong, steady heartbeat of the stranger who'd appeared like an answer to her desperate prayer, and the small, precious weight of her son nestled safely between them. When Lillian awoke, it was to the crackling sound of a fire and an unfamiliar ceiling. Panic surged through her as memory returned in a painful rush. "James," she cried, trying to sit up despite her body's protest. "Easy now," came that same deep voice from before. "Your boy's right here." Lucas Blackwood emerged from the shadows of what appeared to be a modest but well-kept cabin. In his arms, wrapped in clean flannel blankets, was her son, contentedly sleeping. "He's a strong one," Lucas said, carefully transferring the baby to her eager arms. "Hungry, though. Managed to get him to take a little goat's milk while you were out." Lillian pressed her face against her baby's soft head, breathing in his scent, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved our lives." Lucas shrugged uncomfortably, as if unused to gratitude. Any decent man would have done the same. He moved to stoke the fire, and Lillian took the opportunity to study her rescuer properly. Lucas Blackwood was tall and powerfully built, with broad shoulders that tapered to a lean waist. His face was tanned and weathered from years under the sun, with faint lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he was in his early 30s. Dark hair fell in waves to his collar, and a short beard covered a strong jawline. Despite his rugged appearance, there was something gentle about the way he moved, something careful and considered. "Your husband," Lucas said, turning back to her. I'm sorry about what happened. Was it robbers? Lillian nodded, the grief still raw. They stopped the stagecoach. My husband Thomas and I were traveling to his brother's ranch near Fort Benton. Thomas tried to reason with them when they started getting rough with the other passengers, but her voice broke. I know that route, Lucas said grimly. Been hit several times these past months. Sheriff's been chasing shadows trying to catch that gang. He hesitated before adding, if the weather clears by morning, I'll ride out and bring your husband back, give him a proper burial. You've already done so much, Lillian protested weakly. It's the right thing to do, Lucas replied simply. He gestured to a pot hanging over the fire. There's stew if you're hungry. You should eat, especially if you're feeding the little one. Lillian realized she was indeed ravenous. Lucas brought her a bowl of surprisingly flavorful venison stew, which she devoured while nursing James. They ate in companionable silence, the howling wind outside making the cabin's warmth feel all the more precious. Where did you learn to cook like this? Lillian asked, accepting a second helping. A ghost of a smile touched Lucas's lips. 7 years in the saddle with the Montana Cattlemen's Association teaches a man to cook or starve. You're a cattle driver, he corrected. Got tired of the constant moving. Saved enough to buy this place 3 years back. Run about 40 head of cattle now, plus some chickens and 2 ornery goats. Alone? Lillian couldn't help asking. Something flickered in Lucas's eyes. Yes, madam, just me. He stood abruptly. You and the boy can take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire. Before Lillian could protest, Lucas had grabbed a blanket and was arranging a makeshift bed on the floor. Exhaustion soon overwhelmed her, and with James tucked securely beside her, she drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning arrived with blinding brightness as sunlight reflected off the fresh snow outside. Lillian woke to find the cabin empty except for her and James. A note on the table informed her that Lucas had gone to retrieve her husband's body and would return by midday. Beside the note sat a plate of biscuits and a pot of coffee kept warm near the fire. Lillian tended to James, who seemed remarkably resilient despite their ordeal. She explored the cabin while he napped, finding it simple but meticulously organized. A small bookshelf held an impressive collection of volumes ranging from practical manuals on animal husbandry to well-worn copies of Shakespeare and Dickens. On the mantel sat a daguerreotype of a handsome young couple, the woman bearing a striking resemblance to Lucas. As promised, Lucas returned before noon, his expression grave. I found him, he said simply. Wrapped him proper and brought him back. There's a small rise behind the cabin with a view of the valley. It's peaceful, if that suits you. Lillian nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. While James slept, Lucas led her outside to where he'd prepared a grave. The burial was a simple affair, with Lucas reciting from memory the 23rd Psalm in a quiet, respectful voice. Lillian placed Thomas's wedding ring on a leather cord around her neck, alongside her own, and said a silent goodbye to the man she'd married just 2 years prior. Back inside the cabin, Lucas awkwardly cleared his throat. Mrs. Foster, I don't mean to press you when your grief is still fresh, but I should know what plans you have. Fort Benton is still a good 3 days' ride in this weather, and that's with no baby to worry about. Lillian felt the weight of her situation crash down upon her. She was alone in the wilderness with an infant, no money beyond what she carried, and winter settling in with a vengeance. I don't know, she admitted, her voice small. Thomas's brother was expecting us, but I've never met him. Thomas only connected with him recently after years apart. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. Spring thaws still months away. Roads won't be passable for regular travel till then. He rubbed his beard, considering. Proposal for you, Mrs. Foster. Stay here till spring. Cabin's small but warm. When the weather breaks, I'll take you to Fort Benton myself. I couldn't impose, Lillian protested. You've already done more than enough. It's no imposition, Lucas insisted. Been a long while since this place had a woman's touch, and I've got the space. Besides, he added with a glance toward the sleeping James, That boy deserves a warm place to grow through his first winter. Lillian considered her options and found them severely limited. I can cook and clean, she offered, and I sew well, I won't be a burden. Never thought you would be, Lucas replied. The matter seemed settled. The next weeks established a routine between them. Lucas tended his small herd and handled the outdoor chores while Lillian kept the cabin and cared for James. The baby thrived under their joint care, and Lillian found herself slowly emerging from the fog of grief that had enveloped her since Thomas's death. Lucas proved to be a man of few words but consistent actions. Each morning he brought in fresh water and wood before heading out to his chores. Each evening he would spend time with James, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he held the infant. Sometimes he read aloud from his books, his deep voice soothing both mother and child. Christmas approached, bringing with it a temporary break in the harsh weather. One evening, Lucas returned from his chores with a small pine tree slung over his shoulder. Thought the boy should have his first Christmas proper, he said gruffly, setting it up in the corner of the cabin. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Lillian spent the next day crafting simple ornaments from scraps of fabric and ribbon from her trunk. Lucas contributed carved wooden stars he'd apparently been working on in secret. On Christmas Eve, they decorated the tree together, James watching with fascination from his basket. My mother always made paper chains, Lillian remarked as she hung a fabric star. The cabin would be draped with them, all colors of the rainbow. Sounds nice, Lucas said. What was she like, your mother? Kind, patient. She taught school in our town in Pennsylvania until she married my father. Lillian smiled at the memory. She died when I was 16. Fever took her. I'm sorry, Lucas said quietly. Lost mine when I was 12. Father followed 3 years later. The couple in the photograph on your mantle, Lucas nodded. Good people, taught me right from wrong, how to work hard and be honest. He hesitated before adding, they would have liked you. The simple statement warmed Lillian unexpectedly. I think they would be proud of the man you've become, she replied softly. On Christmas morning, Lillian was surprised when Lucas presented her with a small package wrapped in brown paper. It's not much, he said, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Inside was a delicately carved wooden music box. When she opened it, a sweet melody played as a tiny bird seemed to flutter above the box. Lucas, it's beautiful, she breathed. Did you make this? He nodded, a flush creeping up his neck. Been working on it evenings. Thought James might like the tune to help him sleep. Lillian impulsively reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you, truly. She had prepared a gift for him, as well, a new shirt she'd sewn from fabric in her trunk with careful stitching and proper cuffs. Lucas accepted it with genuine appreciation, treating it as though it were made of gold rather than simple cotton. As winter deepened, so did their connection. Lillian found herself looking forward to evenings when they would sit by the fire, James sleeping peacefully while they talked. Lucas was well-read and thoughtful, and though initially reserved, he gradually opened up about his life. Never thought I'd settle in one place, he admitted one night. Drifted most of my early years after my parents passed. Army for a spell during the tail end of the war, then cattle drives. Something about this valley, though, first time I rode through felt like coming home. It is beautiful, Lillian agreed. The cabin windows framed snow-covered mountains that gleamed silver in the moonlight. Peaceful. What about you? Lucas asked. Was your heart set on Fort Benton? Lillian considered the question. Not particularly. Thomas was determined to reconnect with his brother, who apparently has done well for himself ranching. I was following my husband's dream more than pursuing my own. And what is your dream, Lillian? Lucas asked softly, using her given name for the first time. The question caught her off guard. I'm not sure anyone's ever asked me that before. She looked down at her sleeping son. I suppose I just want a safe place to raise James, somewhere he can grow up happy and healthy. Lucas nodded, his gaze following hers to the baby. He's a fine boy, going to be strong like his mother. The compliment brought an unexpected blush to Lillian's cheeks. I'm not so sure about that. Some days I feel barely able to stand. Yet you do, Lucas pointed out, every time. January brought a vicious cold snap that tested even Lucas's well-built cabin. The temperature dropped so severely that Lucas moved his sleeping pallet closer to the bed so that the fire could heat the smaller area more efficiently. Lillian found his presence comforting rather than intrusive, especially on nights when the wind screamed like a banshee around the cabin corners. One particularly brutal night, James developed a worrying cough. By morning, he was burning with fever, his tiny face flushed and his breathing labored. "Lucas," Lillian called, panic edging her voice as she tried to soothe her wailing son. "Something's wrong with James." Lucas was at her side immediately, his brow furrowing as he placed a gentle hand on the baby's forehead. "He's too hot," he confirmed. "Might be the croup." "My mother used to make a steam tent with herbs for my younger brother when he got it." "Do you have the herbs?" Lillian asked desperately. Lucas shook his head. "Not all of them, but Mrs. Chen at the trading post in Silver Creek might. She keeps all manner of medicinals." Silver Creek. "How far is that?" "About 15 miles, Lucas said, already reaching for his heaviest coat. "I can make it there and back by nightfall if I push hard." "But the cold," Lillian protested. "I'll be fine," Lucas assured her. "You keep him warm and try to get fluids in him." "There's willow bark in the kitchen cabinet, steep it weak for his fever. I'll be back as quick as I can." Before Lillian could say more, Lucas was gone, the door closing firmly behind him against the bitter cold. Through the window, she watched him mount his horse and gallop away, his figure quickly disappearing into the swirling snow. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Lillian bathed James's hot forehead with cool cloths and tried to get him to take the willow bark tea, but he was fussy and uncomfortable. By late afternoon, his breathing had become more labored, and Lillian found herself praying desperately for Lucas's return. As dusk approached with no sign of the cowboy, Lillian began to fear the worst. Had he been caught in the storm, lost his way? The thought of losing both Lucas and her son was unbearable, and she found herself moving constantly between the bed where James lay and the window, straining to see through the gathering darkness. Finally, just as full night fell, she heard the blessed sound of hoofbeats approaching. Lucas burst through the door, covered in snow and ice, his face red from cold but triumphant as he held up a small burlap sack. "Got what we need," he announced, stamping snow from his boots. Mrs. Chen knew exactly what to do. "How is he?" "Worse," Lillian admitted, tears threatening. His breathing so labored Lucas. Without removing his coat, Lucas crossed to the bed and examined James. His expression grew serious, but he squeezed Lillian's shoulder reassuringly. "We'll fix him up." Mrs. Chen sent special herbs for a steam tent and a salve for his chest. Working together, they created a tent over James's basket, using blankets draped over chairs. Lucas added the herbs to a pot of boiling water placed carefully near the basket, creating medicinal steam that filled the enclosed space. Then he showed Lillian how to apply the pungent-smelling salve to James's chest and back. "My brother had this 3 times growing up," Lucas explained as they worked. "Scared my mother half to death each time, but he always pulled through." They took turns sitting with James through the night, refreshing the steam and reapplying the salve. By dawn, the baby's breathing had eased significantly, and his fever had broken. When he finally took milk from Lillian and then fell into a peaceful sleep, she collapsed into a chair in exhausted relief. "You should rest," Lucas told her gently. "I'll watch over him." "You rode 30 miles in a blizzard yesterday," Lillian protested weakly. "You need sleep more than I do." "I'm fine," Lucas insisted, though the dark circles under his eyes told a different story. "We'll both rest," Lillian decided. "The bed's big enough. James is between us and we're both fully clothed. There's nothing improper about it." Lucas hesitated, then nodded, too exhausted to argue. They lay down on either side of the sleeping baby, careful not to disturb him. Despite her fatigue, Lillian found herself studying Lucas's face as he quickly drifted off to sleep. In repose, The hard lines of his face softened, making him look younger and oddly vulnerable. "Thank you," she whispered, though he couldn't hear her. "For everything." She fell asleep with one hand resting protectively on James and the other just inches from Lucas's. James recovered quickly after that night, his resilient baby nature asserting itself. The incident, however, changed something between Lillian and Lucas. A new level of trust had formed, a deeper understanding that went beyond mere cohabitation. February arrived with marginally milder weather, allowing Lucas to spend more time outdoors tending to his cattle and making repairs around the property. One afternoon, he returned to the cabin looking particularly pleased with himself. "Got something to show you," he announced. "Bundle the boy up warm." Curious, Lillian did as he asked. Lucas led them to the barn, where he proudly presented a small sleigh he'd constructed from old wagon parts. "Thought you and James might like to see more of the valley than just the view from the cabin windows," he explained, looking almost boyishly eager for her approval. "Lucas, it's wonderful," Lillian exclaimed, genuinely delighted. He hitched his most gentle mare to the sleigh and helped Lillian and James aboard, tucking warm buffalo robes around them before taking the reins. For the next hour, they glided across the snow-covered valley, Lucas pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. James, bundled up so only his bright eyes were visible, seemed entranced by the motion and the sparkling landscape. They stopped at a frozen pond nestled among pine trees. "Used to come ice fishing here with my father," Lucas explained, helping Lillian from the sleigh. "Most peaceful place I know." Standing together at the edge of the pond, with James cradled between them, and the winter sun casting long shadows across the pristine snow, Lillian felt a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced since before Thomas's death. More than contentment, happiness. The realization startled her. Was it wrong to feel happy so soon after becoming a widow? Thomas had been a good man and a decent husband, if somewhat driven and occasionally distant. Their marriage had been more practical than passionate, but she had respected him and mourned his loss genuinely. Yet here, in this moment with Lucas, she felt something stirring that she'd never experienced with Thomas, a warmth that had nothing to do with the buffalo robes or the winter sun. "Penny for your thoughts," Lucas said, breaking into her reverie. Lillian smiled, not ready to share her true musings. "I was just thinking how beautiful it is here. Thank you for bringing us." Lucas studied her face for a moment as if sensing there was more she wasn't saying. "My pleasure," he replied simply. As February gave way to March, signs of the coming spring began to appear. The days grew longer, and the crushing cold eased its grip on the valley. With the changing season came the awareness that Lillian's time at the cabin was growing short. Soon the roads would be passable, and Lucas would fulfill his promise to take her to Fort Benton. The thought filled her with an unexpected dread. She had come to love the rhythm of life in the cabin, the quiet evenings with Lucas, the simple joys of watching James grow stronger each day under their care. The prospect of starting over among strangers, even if they were her late husband's family, felt increasingly like a step backward rather than forward. One evening, as they sat by the fire with James playing on a blanket between them, Lucas broached the subject she'd been avoiding. "Chinook winds have been strong this week," he observed. "Snow's melting faster than usual. Roads to Fort Benton should be clear within the month." Lillian nodded, trying to hide her dismay. "Yes, I suppose they will be." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by James's contented babbling as he reached for a wooden toy Lucas had carved for him. "What will you do?" Lucas finally asked. "At your brother-in-law's ranch," Lillian sighed. "I'm not entirely sure. Thomas said his brother has a large operation. Perhaps he'll have some work for me, cooking or housekeeping, most likely." Lucas frowned slightly. "That's no life for you and the boy." "We'll manage," Lillian said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "We don't have many options." Lucas stared into the fire for a long moment. "You could stay," he said quietly, not meeting her eyes. Lillian's heart quickened. "Stay here with me." Now he looked up, his blue eyes intense in the firelight. "I know it hasn't been long since you lost your husband. I'm not suggesting. That is, I wouldn't expect." He took a deep breath. "What I mean is, you and James could stay on. The cabin's yours for as long as you need it. No obligations." Conflicting emotions washed over Lillian: hope, confusion, gratitude, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "Lucas, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't impose indefinitely." "It's not an imposition," he insisted. "The place runs better with you here, James is thriving, and He hesitated. "I've grown accustomed to having you both around." It was perhaps the closest thing to a declaration of affection she could expect from this reserved man, and Lillian found herself deeply touched by it. "Let me think about it," she said softly. "It's a big decision." Lucas nodded, seemingly relieved she hadn't rejected the idea outright. "Of course, no rush." But time continued its relentless forward march. The snow receded further each day, exposing patches of brown earth that would soon turn green with new growth. Lillian found herself torn between practicality and the wishes of her heart. The decision was forced when a rider appeared at the cabin one afternoon while Lucas was checking on a pregnant heifer in the far pasture. The man introduced himself as Sheriff Malcolm Dawson from Silver Creek. "Mrs. Foster?" he asked when Lillian opened the door. "Lillian Foster." "Yes," she confirmed, surprised to be known by name. "Been looking for you, madam. Got a telegram back in January from a Mr. William Foster in Fort Benton, inquiring after his brother Thomas and family. Said they were expected before Christmas." Lillian's stomach knotted. "My husband was killed by stagecoach robbers in December. Mr. Blackwood found me and my son and took us in." The sheriff removed his hat respectfully. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that, madam. Those bandits have been a scourge on this territory." He produced a folded paper from his vest pocket. "When Mrs. Chen mentioned Blackwood had come looking for medicine for a woman and baby staying with him, I put two and two together. Your brother-in-law left this telegram address for you to contact him." Lillian accepted the paper with a murmured thanks. After the sheriff departed, she stood staring at the folded message, feeling as though it represented a crossroads in her life. When Lucas returned, she showed him the telegram. "It seems Thomas's brother is looking for us," she explained. The sheriff brought his contact information. Lucas's expression remained carefully neutral. "I see. Will you write to him?" "I should," Lillian acknowledged. "He deserves to know what happened to Thomas at the very least." Lucas nodded, his jaw tight. "I'll ride into Silver Creek tomorrow. You can send a wire then." That night, sleep eluded Lillian. She lay awake, listening to James's soft breathing and the occasional creak of the floorboards as Lucas shifted on his pallet near the fire. Her mind churned with indecision. The practical choice would be to contact William Foster and accept whatever assistance he might offer. He was, after all, James's uncle and their closest family connection, but her heart rebelled at the thought of leaving the cabin, of leaving Lucas. Over the past months, he had become more than just their rescuer or reluctant host. He had become friend, confidant, and something more that she hardly dared name, even to herself. By morning, Lillian had made her decision. She wrote a careful letter to William Foster, explaining Thomas's death and their current situation. She expressed gratitude for his concern, but informed him that she and James were settled and well cared for, though she would welcome correspondence if he wished to know his nephew. When she handed the letter to Lucas instead of a telegram draft, he raised an eyebrow in question. "I thought it better to explain everything properly in a letter," she said, "and I've decided to accept your offer, if it still stands." For a moment, Lucas seemed not to comprehend. Then a rare, full smile transformed his face. "It stands," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion, "for as long as you want it." "There's something else," Lillian continued, gathering her courage. "When you made your offer, you were careful to say there were no expectations. That was considerate and respectful, especially given my recent widowhood." Lucas watched her intently, waiting. "But I think we should be honest about what's happening between us," Lillian continued. At least, what I believe is happening, unless I'm entirely mistaken, there are. Feelings growing here on both sides. Lucas swallowed hard. You're not mistaken, he said quietly. I'm not ready for anything formal, Lillian clarified. It's too soon and there's James to consider, but I don't want to pretend those feelings don't exist either. What are you suggesting? Lucas asked. Time, Lillian answered simply. Let's give ourselves time to be sure, to let James grow a little, to let me properly mourn Thomas, but with the understanding that we're not just landlord and tenant or even just friends. Lucas considered this, then nodded slowly. I can give you all the time you need, Lillian. I'm not going anywhere. The promise in those words wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket. Spring arrived in earnest, transforming the valley into a verdant paradise. Lucas expanded the vegetable garden behind the cabin to twice its previous size, and Lillian took over its tending with enthusiasm. James began to crawl, exploring the cabin and yard with boundless curiosity, his sunny disposition charming everyone he encountered on their occasional trips to Silver Creek. A reply eventually came from William Foster, a cordial letter expressing sorrow at his brother's death, and offering assistance should Lillian ever need it, but respecting her decision to remain where she was. He included a small photograph of himself and his wife, asking that James know he had family who cared about him. Lillian responded with a photograph of James that Lucas had arranged to have taken in Silver Creek, beginning a correspondence that would continue for years. As summer approached, Lucas began construction on an addition to the cabin, a proper bedroom for James as he grew. Lillian watched him work, admiring his strength and skill as he shaped logs and raised walls. Their relationship had evolved into a comfortable partnership, with moments of increasing tenderness. A hand lingering on a shoulder, fingers brushing while passing a dish, a shared smile over James's antics. One warm evening in late May, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. James had been put to bed after an exhausting day of practicing his newfound standing skills. I've been thinking, Lucas said, breaking a companionable silence. A dangerous pastime, Lillian teased gently. Lucas smiled. Perhaps, but necessary sometimes. He turned to face her fully. It's been nearly 6 months since Thomas passed. Lillian nodded, her pulse quickening at his serious tone. I've tried to be patient, Lucas continued. To give you the time you asked for, and I'll keep waiting if that's what you need, but I want you to know. He took a deep breath. I love you, Lillian. I think I started falling for you that first night, watching you care for James despite everything you'd been through. Your strength, your kindness, your determination, they humble me daily. Tears welled in Lillian's eyes at his heartfelt words. Lucas, please let me finish, he said gently. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, I just couldn't keep those words inside anymore. You and James, you've become my family, the family I never thought I'd have. Whatever happens next, I needed you to know that. Lillian reached for his hand, linking their fingers together. I love you too, she whispered. It snuck up on me somehow, between the snowstorms and midnight feedings and your quiet strength that never wavered. Lucas's eyes widened, as if he hadn't dared hope for such a response. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a tender kiss that held both reverence and promise. When they parted, Lillian rested her forehead against his. I'm not dishonoring Thomas's memory by loving you, she said, voicing the concern that had troubled her. He would want James and me to be happy, to be cared for. You honor him by raising his son with love, Lucas assured her. And I'll honor him by treating you both with all the respect and care you deserve. As summer bloomed across the valley, so did their relationship. They were married in a simple ceremony in Silver Creek's small church in July, with James toddling down the aisle ahead of his mother. Much to the delight of the small gathering of neighbors and friends Lucas had made over the years. Sheriff Dawson brought particularly welcome news to the wedding celebration. The stagecoach robbery gang had finally been captured after a shootout near the Idaho Territory. Justice for Thomas wouldn't bring him back, but it provided a sense of closure that allowed Lillian to fully embrace her new beginning. William Foster sent a generous wedding gift and an open invitation to visit Fort Benton whenever they wished. Lucas and Lillian planned to make the journey the following summer, when James was older and travel would be easier. Their life together settled into a rhythm of hard work and simple joys. Lucas's small cattle operation prospered under their joint efforts, and the cabin expanded room by room as their needs grew. When Lillian discovered she was expecting a child the following spring, Lucas's joy knew no bounds. He spent hours crafting a cradle from maple wood, more elaborate than anything he'd made before. "For our son or daughter," he explained when Lillian admired his handiwork. "Though James will always be our firstborn in every way that matters." Indeed, Lucas had legally adopted James shortly after the wedding, though they agreed the boy would always know about Thomas, the father who had loved him in his too brief life. On a crisp October day in 1878, nearly 2 years after Lucas had found Lillian and James in the snow, their daughter Lucy was born with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. James, now a sturdy toddler of nearly 2, approached his baby sister with solemn curiosity before placing a gentle kiss on her forehead, a gesture he'd seen his father perform countless times with his mother. That night, with Lucy sleeping in her cradle and James curled up in his small bed in the room Lucas had built for him, Lillian stood at the cabin window watching the first snowflakes of the season begin to fall. Lucas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. Lillian leaned back against his solid strength. "About how different this winter will be from the last time snow covered this valley." "How far we've come. Any regrets?" Lucas asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. Lillian turned in his arms to face him. "Not one," she assured him, pressing a kiss to his lips. "You gave me shelter in the storm, Lucas Blackwood. Not just a physical shelter, but a place for my heart to heal and grow stronger." "You gave me a family," Lucas replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Something I'd stopped believing I would ever have." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white much as it had on that fateful December day. But this time, instead of despair and death, it heralded warmth and life and a love that had been born in the most unlikely of circumstances. Years later, the story would become a family legend how Lucas had found Lillian in the snow with baby James on her lap, how he'd said those simple words that changed everything. "Let me take him." Their children, and eventually their grandchildren, would beg to hear it told again and again, especially on snowy winter evenings when the family gathered around the fireplace in the large, rambling house that had grown from the original cabin. And Lillian would always end the tale the same way, with a loving glance at the man who had been her partner through decades of joys and sorrows. Sometimes rescue comes in unexpected forms, and sometimes the person who saves you needs saving too. Your father and I found each other when we both thought we had lost our way, and in that finding, we discovered a love strong enough to weather any storm. In the twilight of their years, Lucas and Lillian could often be found on the porch of their home, watching their grandchildren play in the same valley that had witnessed their beginning. James, grown into a fine man with a family of his own, ran the now substantial cattle operation with his father's work ethic and his mother's kind heart. Lucy had become a teacher, educating the children of Silver Creek with passion and dedication. Did you ever imagine this? Lillian would sometimes ask as they sat together, her hand still fitting perfectly in his after all their years together, and Lucas would shake his head in wonder. "Not even in my wildest dreams," he would answer honestly. "But I thank God every day that I rode through that blizzard and found you and James waiting for me, though neither of us knew it at the time." On the coldest winter nights, when the wind howled around the eaves of their home much as it had that first December. They would hold each other close, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought together a desperate young widow with a baby and a solitary cowboy with room in his heart for a family he never expected to find. For Lillian and Lucas Blackwood, what had begun as rescue had transformed into the greatest love story either could have imagined, one written not in grand gestures or sweeping romance, but in quiet moments of faith and commitment, in challenges faced together, and in the legacy of love they built day by day in their corner of the Montana wilderness.